One of the things that really challenged us was, again, the final battle.
The Pier sequence was the most fun for me because we got to put everything that we learned throughout the process of making this movie, and you're going to see it all in this big, exciting climax. We had CG Pier, we had live action Pier, we had miniature Pier, we had water elements, we had smoke elements.
This is a shot and really the whole sequence which combines both miniature photography and CG work. So they're not separate of each other, they're combined. And really one of the arts in visual effects now is understanding photographic means and computer means and how to blend them together, and that's really the best way to get the most dramatic effects.
Now what?
This particular miniature shot is complex in that we have a number of practical effects that are working with the miniature photography as well.
All these wires are connected to the objects inside the warehouse, and when our ratchet goes, it'll pull everything in the warehouse and basically start the collapsing sequence.
We also have multiple cameras on this. This is the kind of event, because as you're saying, you only do once. You want to capture it in many different ways, because a wide shot has a life, a certain amount of life, and then when you get close-ups, you can extend everything. You can make it look bigger and bigger and bigger, and so that's why we have 5 cameras on this whole shot.
We're going to shoot a beauty pass. After that, we do an overexposure pass of the same thing, and then we turn out all the lights and do our prominence pass. Okay?
Each shot consists of what we call normal exposure. Then we have an overexposed pass, which can give you all the different highlights. We have various affected lights. These flashlight elements. This is the actual, whenever the fusion machine has any prominences that come off of it, this is how these prominences would affect the building around it. That all gets put together.
This is all done in quarter scale. It has a lot of aspects to it that have taken a lot of time and a lot of design and a lot of forethought in creating. And this is the kind of thing that you really get to do once. So you have to make your best estimate in terms of how things will combine together, and then go for it.
We had not planned on doing the amount of CG water and the type of CG water that ultimately went into the scene. What tends to make it really successful is a really clever blend of practical elements and CGI elements, and that's usually the way that it sells best. Well, we didn't have that benefit because while we were shooting it, we didn't have the understanding of the description of the water we were going to be doing, so we didn't shoot elements with the intention of the use that they would ultimately need to be the way they'd need to be put into the shots.
Creating our CG water was a pretty big deal for us because we hadn't planned from the start to do it. It's just when we got our miniature water that the scale wasn't working that well. One of our guys, Theo Vandernoot, came up with a whole system that allowed us to bring a lot more interaction with our fusion ball and more dynamics to the water to get what the director wanted. So what we have here is a grid on a surface that represents where the giant scale waves are, and it allows at the very base level us to see what the dynamics of the water are. And this is a more refined version, and we can see when it sags down, that represents where the influence of our fusion ball is that's sinking into the water. So we kind of came up with the concept that it's pushing away the water from some magnetic force and creating this giant divot in the water. And as we progress in the shot, we start refining it with more and more detail so we can get more intricate definition of the surface. What we have here, we've taken a slice of the surface and started to define what its contours are. These lines represent vectors that define how the shape of the surface is represented in the computer. And the arrows help us determine where the slope of this surface is and how it's going to be used to generate the flow on top of the surface. So when we go back to our shot view, we can see there's a lot of different things around that are going to influence what the final look of the surface is. We put in images that we have from the set of the background pier that this whole scene takes place in, and they're mapped onto cards, and these cards are later going to define what the surface bounces off of, where the water has to intersect and bounce and interact with, and also lighting wise how it's going to light the water and how it's going to reflect into the water. So based on this background, our artists start to put in geometry that our simulation of the water will interact with. And what we have here is a different representation of the water that just shows us smaller, finer detail that define little wavelets on top of the giant scale water. This is just a graphical representation of all the forces that are being calculated in the water system. The other thing that makes this system much more complex is we have to have the water surface interacting with everything that falls into it, which in computer graphics is usually pretty difficult. So what we've done is to put that geometry down into and intersect into our water, and then we do additional calculations based on that. And then even on top of that, we at the end of the day layer in real water and real spray elements that we've captured on set.